Welcome to CxO Disruptors. Today we're continuing the theme around sustainability, hot on the heels of COP26. This is now a time for action. Today we're delighted to be speaking with MacHale, Head of Institutional Strategy, Sustainability and Growth, and absolutely delighted to be talking to somebody in business who is taking action, not just talking, and how they're applying that to their current business environment. Hi Sean, thanks very much for joining us today. Perhaps we could start with talking to you about what have been the catalysts for bringing sustainability to the forefront of the work you're doing at the Bank of Ireland.
Good morning and thanks for having me. For me, there's been many different drivers in that, but I think there's three primary catalysts. The first of which I would say is the general public and consumers in terms of consumer demand and that. People want to live more sustainable lifestyle. Our kids are learning about recycling and nature in school. And in turn, people want to have a positive impact on the planet, and they're voting with their pockets. So consumer behaviour is having a profound effect, not just on the products we buy and consume, but also on the people we do business with and buy from who provide these services. The second for me would be around the area of regulation, legislation and government policy, where we're seeing policies being introduced to support the transition to the low carbon economy, along with legislation being introduced to compel those who maybe don't want to come on the journey to play their part under the polluter pays principle. And finally, I think the third and big area or catalyst for change and sustainability is the area of finance and the access to capital. And in this regard, the asset management community has been to the forefront, and we've seen a substantial industry shift in terms of supporting ESG and sustainability.
The forestry deal you've completed with the Nature Trust. I would love to hear more about the background of the deal, how it's made up and what you've learned from it.
First of all, we were absolutely delighted to bring the deal to market and that. And to give you a little bit of background on it, the Nature Trust, which is a joint venture between Forestry Partners and Quilcha, which is the Irish State Forestry Company, approached us about 12 months ago or so, with an objective to create native woodland across Ireland on a strict not-for-profit basis. So the forests themselves are public amenities and are designed in such a way for the public to enjoy and that. So we took it away, did a lot of due diligence as one can imagine being a bank and that. And what we came up with was the concept of the Woodland Nature Credit, which effectively securitizes the ecosystem of services that a forest generates, which there's effectively three. It's the carbon sequestered, which is all additional. It's the biodiversity uplift, which obviously greatly increases when you create a natural habitat. And the third is the amenity value, which is the health and well-being value that people get from using public amenities and being outdoors, and maybe particularly more so now that we're going through COVID times and that. So effectively, we brought those three components together through the credit, and the funder to the credit owns those benefits and can use those benefits to meet their publicly stated objectives in terms of their environmental commitments, but also their social commitments. In terms of the credit itself, a huge amount of governance went into it in that. So it follows the EU taxonomy, which speaks directly to afforestation, has some very, very strict rules around that, which gives us the funders great comfort that the forest would be created to a best-in-class standard. It also speaks to verification, which obviously has to occur periodically, and that's to ensure that the benefits are accruing as one would want and wish, and that. And this third big component is all around the area of reporting and that. So again, the trust itself produces an annual report, and then the independent verifiers periodically produce their own reports. And those reports can be used in terms of the non-financial reporting directive and the upcoming CSRD directive as well, where funders can show and prove how they're having that positive impact, not only on the environment, but also in terms of meeting those social goals. The first transaction will plant over 600,000 trees across 200 hectares, and we're fortunate to have AXA to come in and fund the first transaction.
What were the attitudes of those that were interested in the deal, and how did you educate them on the opportunity?
Sure. So because it was a first of its kind transaction, we spent a lot of time socialising the deal with potential funders. Now, we didn't go to that many. What we really did was take as a starting point those companies who had made publicly stated claims of being net zero by a certain date, or who were on the journey of wanting to reduce their environmental footprint whilst having a social objective and that. So we approached those companies, we explained to them the components of the transaction, why it was different to maybe other things that they would have seen in the market, because again, everyone hears about carbon credits. This isn't a carbon credit, and again, what we did was spend a lot of time, walking through the governance, the level of reporting, the level of verification, and that. So for us, this is bringing, I suppose, the whole area of natural capital to a whole new space by raising the standards substantially, and again, that's one of the reasons why we chose to follow the EU taxonomy, because again, that's what defines green across Europe, and will obviously, last and become regulation at the start of next year. So again, we spent some time going through it, understanding the requirements and the needs of companies as part of the due diligence phase. And then, of course, when we brought it to market, we got an overwhelming positive response to the point that, when we had a very early discussion with AXA, and they, said, listen, we'd be delighted to take the whole transaction, because again, it speaks directly to what we want to do, and it's to a standard they hadn't seen before. And again, that's why I'm delighted to say that we'll be launching a second tranche in the new year, which will enable the planting of over 1.2 million trees across 400 hectares. And again, each one of these forests is open to the public and is designed with the tracks and the trails and so forth, that obviously the public needs to have to be able to enjoy it and that.
What are your reflections on the overall financing environment to enable transactions like this to happen in greater volumes going forward?
Sure. So I think it's a very, very new space in that. I think, Barclays had some research out on it and that. And I think they said the size of the market was about 500 million or so, which is up from 300 million in 2019. So as you can see, a tiny, tiny market, but is growing quite quickly. And that, for me, the biggest challenge was when we spoke to potential funders, was that they couldn't find projects to a sufficiently high standard, and that they would be comfortable in terms of say, yes, we're funding this, we know it's going to work, and in turn we can use that to meet our environmental commitments. So again, that was refreshing in that. But I guess, like a lot of things, until you've built one and it's done, and that you don't know, and that. So again, that's why we spent, as I said, a lot of time preparing it, a lot of time doing the due diligence, stress testing it, and of course then we did a soft sound exercise where we spoke to potential funders and that, and got a lot of feedback, which was extremely useful in terms of finalizing the structure and that. But for me, it's a growing market, because I think in simple terms, if you come out and say, my company or we're going to be net zero by a certain date, and that, despite all the good work you could do in terms of your own operations, you are going to be left with a residual value in that, and you will need some form of additionality to offset that. And it's in that guise that this project and product comes into its own. I think the other thing as well is that biodiversity is much more important than it was 2 years ago, and that I think companies are waking up to that fact that it's not just about carbon, but they also need to account for biodiversity and the natural, their impact in terms of natural capital and that. And again, it was one of the reasons why we included that in the structure. It was because we could see down the road that this would be very, very important to funders and companies going forward. So we included in that. And again, that's helped future-proof the entire transaction and move it away from, I suppose, carbon credits, which, unfortunately, some of which have a bad name.